Violence has broken out in several cities across Mexico, hours after the army confirmed it had killed one of the country's most feared drug lords. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, was the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. He was shot in a dawn raid and died from his injuries.
They killed the world's most dangerous drug lord. What happened next left an entire country in flames. Cities shut down in minutes. Airports descended into pure panic. Tourists ran for their lives. Soldiers were ambushed in broad daylight. Over 70 people died in a single day. The Mexican government thought taking out El Mencho would be a victory. Instead, it unleashed something nobody was ready for. To understand the full weight of what happened that morning and why it set off a wave of violence that would reach nearly every corner of Mexico within hours, you first need to understand who this man was and what he represented.
Well, it's been nearly 12 hours since the news spread out that El Mencho, the most wanted criminal, not only in Mexico or the United States, but globally in the world, was killed. So the reactions were immediately violent across all over Mexico. In 9 of the states in Mexico suspended.
El Mencho was 59 years old at the time of his death. He was the founder and leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a criminal organization known by its Spanish initials CJNG. Born in the state of Michoacán, Oseguera Cervantes had a history that reads like a dark blueprint for how cartel bosses are made. He had prior arrests in the United States on drug-related charges and was deported back to Mexico, where he eventually rose through the ranks of existing criminal networks before breaking away to establish his own organization around 2009. What followed over the next decade and a half was a rapid and brutal expansion that made CJNG one of the most feared criminal groups on the planet. The cartel built its power on the trafficking of hard drugs into the United States, primarily fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine. Fentanyl in particular became the cartel's most devastating export. The synthetic opioid, which can be up to 100 times more potent than morphine, has been at the center of the overdose crisis that has killed tens of thousands of Americans every single year. El Mencho was not simply a drug trafficker in the traditional sense. Under his leadership, CJNG also engaged in extortion, migrant smuggling, oil and mineral theft, and weapons trading. The organization operated with a level of military-style discipline and firepower that set it apart from many of its rivals. The United States government had been trying to bring El Mencho down for years. The US State Department placed a reward of up to $15 million on his head, making him one of the most wanted criminals in the world. That figure alone tells you something about how seriously American law enforcement and intelligence agencies viewed him as a threat. In February 2025, the Trump administration took the additional step of formally designating CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization, a classification that placed the cartel alongside groups more commonly associated with political extremism. The reasoning behind that designation was straightforward. This was not just a criminal enterprise. It was an organization with the resources, the reach, and the willingness to use mass violence as a tool of control. For years, El Mencho managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities. There were numerous operations, countless intelligence leads, and persistent pressure from both Mexican and American agencies, but he remained elusive. He was known to move frequently, rarely staying in one location long enough to be pinned down, and he surrounded himself with layers of protection that made direct action extremely difficult. His ability to avoid capture added to the almost mythological status he had developed within Mexico, particularly in his home state of Jalisco, where the cartel had its strongest roots. All of that changed on the morning of February the 22nd. Mexican special forces moved in on the town of Tapalpa, a small municipality in Jalisco state, roughly a 2-hour drive southwest of Guadalajara. What followed was a firefight. According to Mexico's Ministry of Defense, Oseguera Cervantes was wounded during the raid. He did not die immediately at the scene. He was transported by air towards Mexico City, but he did not survive the journey. The Defense Ministry confirmed in an official statement that he died while being flown to Soutst, the capital. During the operation itself, troops came under fire from armed individuals at the location. 4 people were killed at the site, and 3 others, including El Mencho, were wounded and later died from their injuries. This was not a purely Mexican operation. That point is important, and it has significant implications for how we understand the relationship between the United States and Mexico in the fight against drug trafficking. The US Embassy in Mexico confirmed publicly that the operation was carried out by Mexican special forces within the framework of bilateral cooperation, with American authorities providing what they described as complementary intelligence. In plain terms, the United States helped make this happen. American intelligence services had been working alongside their Mexican counterparts, and the information they provided played a role in locating and targeting El Mencho. The White House did not stay quiet about its involvement. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed via social media that the US government had provided intelligence support for the operation. She described El Mencho as one of the top traffickers of fentanyl into the United States and commended Mexico's military for what she called a significant achievement. US Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau also publicly confirmed the cartel leader's death, describing him as one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins in the world. These are strong words from senior American officials, and they reflect just how high a priority the elimination of El Mencho had become in Washington. On the Mexican side, the operation represented a major shift in approach under President Claudia Sheinbaum. Her predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, had largely moved away from what analysts call the kingpin strategy, the practice of targeting and eliminating the top figures of criminal organizations. That approach had been criticized in the past because taking out a cartel leader often leads to exactly the kind of chaos that followed El Mencho's death, as power vacuums open up and rival factions fight for control. Sheinbaum had publicly criticized that same strategy before coming to power. But analysts noted that since she took office, the Mexican army had become significantly more confrontational and combative against criminal groups. David Mora, an analyst with the International Crisis Group in Mexico, put it plainly. The military had changed its posture under her administration, and the operation in Tapalpa was evidence of that. For Mexico, the stakes of this operation went beyond the death of one man. The country is under significant pressure from the United States government. President Donald Trump has repeatedly demanded that Mexico do more to stop the flow of fentanyl across the border, threatening additional tariffs and even suggesting the possibility of unilateral American military action if results were not delivered. The killing of El Mencho was, in that context, a major statement. It was Mexico demonstrating in the most direct way possible that it was capable of and willing to go after the very top of the criminal hierarchy. Whether that statement will ultimately lead to a safer Mexico or simply to a more fragmented and unpredictable criminal landscape remains to be seen. What was certain in the hours following the operation in Tapalpa was that the death of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes had not ended the violence. It had, in many ways, just begun a new chapter of it. The cartel's retaliation came fast, it came hard, and it came in numbers that overwhelmed security forces across multiple states simultaneously. That story and everything that unfolded in the hours after El Mencho took his last breath is what we are going to get into next. The retaliation was almost instantaneous. Within hours of the operation in Tapalpa, before many people in Mexico had even finished their Sunday morning routines, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel began making its presence felt across the country in the most violent and disruptive way it knew how. What unfolded over the following hours was not a localized reaction confined to one city or one state. It was a coordinated, nationwide display of force that stretched across at least 20 of Mexico's 32 states, and it sent a very clear message to both the Mexican government and the watching world. The cartel was still operational, still organized, and still capable of bringing large parts of the country to a standstill. The tactic used was one that CJNG and other Mexican cartels have employed before in moments of crisis. Cartel members fanned out across cities, towns, and highways and began setting vehicles on fire. Buses, cars, trucks, anything that could be used to create a roadblock and generate chaos became a target. The burning vehicles were placed across roads to block military movements, disrupt emergency responses, and create a visual spectacle of disorder that would spread through social media within minutes. In total, authorities reported more than 250 roadblocks across 20 states before security forces began the long process of clearing them. The scale of that operation alone gives you a sense of just how many people and how much coordination was involved. This did not happen by accident. It was planned, and it was executed with a speed that suggested the cartel had contingency plans already in place for exactly this kind of scenario. The epicenter of the violence was Jalisco, the cartel's home state and the place where CJNG had its deepest roots, its strongest networks, and its most loyal foot soldiers. Guadalajara, the state capital and Mexico's second-largest city, effectively shut down. Residents stayed indoors. Businesses closed their doors. Public transport was suspended by order of Jalisco Governor Pablo Lemus, who told the population directly to remain at home and off the streets. Streets that would normally be busy on a Sunday morning were left empty. Smoke rose from burning vehicles on multiple roads across the city and in the surrounding municipality of Zapopan. By Sunday evening, Guadalajara looked, by most accounts, like a ghost town. It was a surreal and deeply unsettling sight for a metropolitan area that is home to millions of people and that carries enormous cultural and economic significance within Mexico. Puerto Vallarta, one of the most popular tourist destinations on Mexico's Pacific coast, experienced some of the most dramatic and widely reported scenes of the entire day. The city, which draws large numbers of international visitors throughout the year, suddenly found itself in the middle of a security crisis that nobody had anticipated when they booked their holidays. Cartel members set vehicles and structures ablaze across the city. Roads were blocked, and access routes in and out of the urban center were cut off. Smoke billowed over the coastline that tourists come from across the world to enjoy, and the sound of gunfire could be heard in parts of the city that are normally associated with beach restaurants and seafront hotels. One long-term resident of the area, speaking to media on condition of anonymity, said he had lived in the region for 15 years and had never seen anything remotely like what happened that Sunday. He explained how many hotel and service workers had already started their shifts by around 7 in the morning, which was roughly when the violence began to escalate. People were stranded at their workplaces, unable to get home, and those who had not yet left their residences quickly decided it was safer to stay put. The violence was not limited to Jalisco. Reports came in from Michoacán, Colima, Tamaulipas, Guanajuato, and Aguascalientes, among other states. In Reynosa, a border city in the state of Tamaulipas that sits directly across from McAllen, Texas, roads leading to and from the airport were blocked by cartel members. International bridges remained open, but key streets needed to reach them were cut off, leaving many people, including American citizens who regularly travel between the two cities for work and family reasons, unable to move freely. The message being sent was not just for the Mexican government, it was for anyone paying attention, on either side of the border, and it was delivered with a clarity that was difficult to ignore. The human cost of the retaliation was severe and deeply troubling. Mexican authorities confirmed that 25 members of the National Guard were killed across 6 separate attacks in Jalisco alone. These were not casualties from the original operation in Tapalpa. These were security personnel who were targeted and killed specifically in response to El Mencho's death, as the cartel sought to punish the state's security forces for their role in what had happened earlier that morning. A jail guard was also killed at a lockup in Puerto Vallarta when prisoners rioted inside the facility. An agent from the EZR, Jalisco State Prosecutor's Office, was killed in Guadalajara. In the neighboring state of Michoacán, 4 more people lost their lives. When all the numbers were counted, including security forces, cartel members, and civilians caught up in the violence. Authorities confirmed that more than 70 people died in connection with the operation and its immediate aftermath. That figure, spanning a single day and a single chain of events, underscores just how catastrophic the consequences of the operation turned out to be, even as the government celebrated the elimination of one of the world's most wanted criminals. In one particularly striking development, soldiers operating in Jalisco tracked down and killed another senior cartel figure who, according to Mexican security officials, had been actively coordinating the retaliatory violence in real time. This individual had reportedly been offering payments of more than $1,000 for every soldier killed, essentially putting a bounty on members of the Mexican military in the middle of an active security operation. The fact that this level of coordination was happening simultaneously with the visible chaos on the streets illustrates how structured and directed the cartel's response was. It was not simply a spontaneous eruption of grief or anger following the loss of a leader. It was an organized counter-operation, running alongside the roadblocks and the arson, with a clear chain of command still functioning even in the immediate aftermath of El Mencho's death. The attacks on the National Guard were particularly significant in terms of their scale and audacity. Losing 25 security personnel in a single day across 6 separate ambushes represents a level of military-style engagement that goes well beyond what most people associate with criminal activity. These were coordinated assaults on government forces, carried out in multiple locations simultaneously, in broad daylight, using heavy weaponry. Social media footage from the day showed armored National Guard vehicles that had been targeted and disabled, as well as intense firefight footage captured from various locations around Jalisco. The gunfire audible in some of those clips was not the sound of small pistols or shotguns. It was the sound of serious military-grade firepower being used in a densely populated region, and it painted a picture of just how well-equipped and well-prepared the cartel's operational units are. The Guadalajara International Airport became one of the most visible and internationally reported flashpoints of the day. Footage that circulated widely on social media showed passengers running through the airport terminal in a state of visible panic, their luggage left behind, their composure completely gone. Armed gunmen had been reported operating in areas surrounding the airport, and the combination of that immediate threat and the broader chaos engulfing the city created an environment of serious and sustained fear for Seoul. Thousands of travelers who suddenly found themselves with no safe way in or out. Airlines began responding quickly as the situation developed. Air Canada announced the suspension of its flights to Puerto Vallarta. Southwest Airlines and Alaska Airlines cancelled flights to and from the city. Delta Airlines cancelled services and issued travel waivers for passengers holding bookings into or out of both Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. American Airlines followed shortly after with a similar waiver policy for affected customers. A notice to airmen was also issued, restricting flights within a 10 nautical mile radius of the affected area up to an altitude of 22,000 feet, a measure that further complicated air travel across the region. The U.S. Embassy in Mexico issued a formal security alert urging American citizens in Jalisco, Tamaulipas, Michoacán, Guerrero, and Nuevo León to shelter in place and remain indoors until further notice. The alert specifically warned people not to travel to their airports until they had confirmed their flight was actually departing. Taxi and rideshare services in Puerto Vallarta were suspended entirely, cutting off another layer of mobility for people trying to reach safety or simply get home. Canada's embassy issued similar guidance to its citizens in the region, and the UK Foreign Office updated its travel advice accordingly. For the many American, Canadian, and European tourists who had been enjoying a winter holiday in one of Mexico's most visited coastal destinations, the day turned from a relaxing break into something genuinely frightening. Away from the airports and the main roads, ordinary life in Jalisco ground to a halt in ways that extended well beyond the immediate violence itself. One of the more unexpected and humanizing scenes of the entire day came from Guadalajara's city zoo. More than 1,000 people who had been visiting the zoo for a normal Sunday family outing found themselves unable to leave as the security situation outside deteriorated rapidly. Police determined it was not safe for visitors to travel back to their homes, and the zoo's management opened its facilities to accommodate everyone from young children to elderly visitors. People slept in buses parked within the zoo grounds. Families from neighboring states like Zacatecas and Michoacán were left stranded overnight, with no safe route back home. The zoo's director described how the facility had to find room and resources for over 1,000 people with no advance warning and no preparation. Staff went out of their way to ensure that visitors were as comfortable as possible in deeply uncomfortable circumstances. It was an unusual detail amid a day defined by destruction, and it offered a small but telling glimpse into how ordinary Mexican families experienced the chaos unleashed by the cartel's response. By the time Sunday night gave way to Monday morning, authorities said they had cleared around 83% of the roadblocks reported across the country, but the streets of Guadalajara remained largely quiet, and the sense of unease that had settled over the city had not lifted. Many businesses stayed closed. Pharmacies that did open served customers through chained doors, handing out food, medicine, water, and baby supplies to people queuing outside, unwilling to venture further than they absolutely had to. Schools in Jalisco, Nayarit, Colima, and Michoacán were suspended at all levels, across both public and private institutions. Even Mexico City's National Autonomous University suspended activities at some of its faculties and asked out-of-state students to remain where they were rather than attempt to travel. The physical roadblocks were being removed one by one, but the fear that had settled over millions of people across the country was going to take considerably longer to address. As one resident of Michoacán put it, the events of that Sunday had demonstrated in the starkest possible terms just how quickly a cartel can bring a city to its knees. Not in days, not in hours, in minutes. When the immediate chaos began to settle and the roadblocks were gradually cleared, the questions that remained were in many ways more complicated than the violence itself. The killing of El Mencho was, without doubt, a significant moment in the history of Mexico's struggle against organized crime. It was the kind of operation that governments point to as evidence that their security strategy is working, that pressure and persistence can eventually bring even the most powerful criminal figures to justice. But history has shown, repeatedly and painfully, that removing the man at the top of a criminal organization rarely removes the organization itself. And in the case of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, an empire built over more than 15 years with roots stretching across dozens of countries and generating billions of dollars in annual revenue, the question of what comes next is one that nobody can answer with any real certainty. The most immediate concern for millions of people in the days following the operation was far more practical than questions of criminal succession. It was simply about getting home, getting on a plane, or getting back to some version of normal life. The travel disruption caused by the cartel's retaliation was extensive and affected thousands of people who had no connection whatsoever to the events in Tapalpa. Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, two of the most visited destinations in Mexico by international tourists, effectively became inaccessible for a significant period. Air Canada had already suspended flights to Puerto Vallarta on the Sunday itself, citing the ongoing security situation and advising customers not to travel to the airport. Southwest Airlines and Alaska Airlines cancelled their flights to and from the city. Delta Airlines cancelled services into both Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara and issued travel waivers for affected passengers. American Airlines followed with a similar policy, waiving change fees for customers with bookings in or out of either airport in the immediate aftermath of the violence. The US State Department's 24-hour crisis hotline received hundreds of calls from American citizens caught up in the disruption. The vast majority of those calls related to flight cancellations and the practical problem of how to get out of a country that had suddenly become extremely difficult to navigate. The State Department continued to urge Americans in multiple parts of Mexico to shelter in place, and that guidance was not limited to Jalisco. Citizens in tourist hotspots, including Cancun and Cozumel, were also advised to remain indoors, reflecting the broader uncertainty about where the violence might spread next. US government staff based across various parts of Mexico were directed to shelter in place and work remotely until the situation stabilized. For American tourists who needed assistance, the State Department made its emergency contact numbers publicly available, and consular staff worked through the disruption to provide support where they could. The economic impact on Mexico's tourism industry was considerable. Puerto Vallarta is not a minor destination. It is one of the country's most important sources of tourist income, drawing visitors from North America, Europe, and beyond throughout the year. The images of burning vehicles, smoke-filled streets, and panicked travelers running through airport terminals were broadcast around the world and watched by millions of people who had either recently visited Mexico or were planning to do so. The damage to confidence in the country as a safe holiday destination is difficult to quantify immediately, but it is real and it will take time to undo. Hotels, restaurants, tour operators, and the tens of thousands of workers employed in the tourism sector across Jalisco faced an immediate and sharp interruption to their livelihoods through no fault of their own and with no warning. One of the broader consequences of the violence that received significant attention was its potential impact on the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Guadalajara is one of the host cities for the tournament, which is scheduled to take place across the United States, Canada, and Mexico in the summer of 2026, just months away from the events of that Sunday. The city's Estadio Akron is one of the designated match venues, and thousands of international football fans are expected to travel to Guadalajara to watch games in the coming months. The scenes that played out on the streets of the city, the burning vehicles, the closed businesses, the empty roads, and the soldiers on patrol were watched by people all over the world who now have serious questions about whether it is safe to travel there. One security analyst put it plainly, saying he completely understood why anyone holding tickets for World Cup games in Guadalajara might decide not to go, given that, just 4 months before the tournament was due to begin, the city had been visibly on fire. FIFA and the relevant football authorities have not yet made any formal statements about whether the events affect their planning, but the pressure on both the Mexican government and the tournament organizers to provide reassurances will only grow in the weeks ahead. The question of who will lead CJNG now that El Mencho is gone is one that analysts, intelligence agencies, and law enforcement bodies on both sides of the border are working to answer. The cartel he built is enormous. At the time of his death, CJNG had an established presence not just across Mexico, but in multiple countries around the world, with networks for drug distribution, money laundering, and arms procurement that span continents. An organization of that scale does not simply disappear when its founder dies, but it does face a period of internal uncertainty and potential instability that could have unpredictable consequences. The name being discussed most frequently in relation to succession is Juan Carlos González Valencia, El Mencho's stepson. He is the son of El Mencho's wife from a previous relationship and was adopted by Oseguera Cervantes. He holds a senior position within the cartel's structure, specifically running its paramilitary wing, which is the most militarized and operationally aggressive part of the organization. Analysts who follow CJNG closely describe him as the most likely candidate to hold the cartel together, in part because of his direct family connection to El Mencho and the loyalty that comes with that, and in part because of his existing command over the cartel's most powerful armed unit. If he is able to step into the leadership role effectively, there is a possibility that CJNG maintains its cohesion and continues to operate as a unified force, at least in the short term. However, that outcome is far from guaranteed. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, for all its military-style discipline and organizational structure, is still ultimately held together by a combination of fear, money, and personal loyalty to the man who built it. El Mencho was not just a boss in the administrative sense. He was a figure around whom an entire culture of loyalty had developed over 15 years. Replacing that kind of influence is not simply a matter of announcing a new leader. If González Valencia is unable to command the same level of authority and respect, or if other senior commanders within the organization decide that the death of El Mencho represents an opportunity to pursue their own ambitions, the result could be a fragmentation of CJNG into multiple competing factions. Security analysts have pointed out that there are several commanders within the cartel who have the financial resources, the manpower, and the territorial control to establish their own independent criminal enterprises if the central leadership structure weakens. That prospect carries serious implications beyond Mexico's borders. A fragmented CJNG would not simply mean less violence. It could, and historically in similar situations it has, meant more violence, as splintering factions fight each other for control of drug trafficking routes, territory, and criminal markets. The cartels that emerged from the fragmentation of older criminal organizations in Mexico have in many cases been more chaotic and more brutal than their predecessors, precisely because the internal discipline and hierarchy that kept violence at least somewhat managed no longer exists. This is the central dilemma of the kingpin strategy that Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum had herself criticized before taking office. Killing the leader can be a genuine achievement, but the aftermath carries its own serious risks. For ordinary Mexicans, the immediate aftermath of El Mencho's death brought a mix of emotions that is difficult to reduce to simple terms. There was relief in some quarters that a man responsible for enormous amounts of suffering was gone. There was also fear, pervasive and well-founded, about what comes next. A resident of Zitácuaro in Michoacán, speaking anonymously to media in the days following the events, captured something important when describing the experience of watching her city shut down within minutes of the violence beginning. The fear that remains in society, she said, is overwhelming. What the events of that Sunday had demonstrated more clearly than perhaps any government report or academic analysis ever could is the extent to which these organizations have embedded themselves into the fabric of daily life. They control transport networks. They have influence over local officials. They can, at a moment's notice, bring an entire city to a standstill. that reality does not change simply because one man is dead. For common Mexicans, there is also a more specific and immediate concern that analysts have flagged in the wake of El Mencho's killing. When a cartel leadership structure breaks down or comes under pressure, the criminal cells within that organization often resort to increased extortion and forced recruitment in order to maintain their resources and their numbers. Local businesses, families, and young people in areas with a strong cartel presence can find themselves facing greater pressure than before, even as the national government celebrates what it describes as a historic victory against organized crime. The gap between the official narrative and the lived experience of people in Jalisco, Michoacán, and the many other states where CJNG has operated is one that will be worth watching closely in the months ahead. What is clear, looking at the full picture of what happened on February the 22nd and in the days that followed, is that Mexico is at a genuinely significant crossroads. The death of El Mencho is real, and it matters. Removing the world's biggest fentanyl trafficker from the equation has value, both for Mexico and for the United States, whose communities have been devastated by the drug crisis that CJNG helped to fuel. But the operation and its violent aftermath have also revealed, with uncomfortable clarity, just how deep the roots of organized crime run in Mexican society, and how far the country still has to go before its citizens can live without the threat of that kind of chaos descending on their streets with almost no warning at all. The road ahead is uncertain, and for the millions of people who spent that Sunday sheltering in their homes, waiting for the smoke to clear and the gunfire to stop, the future remains an open and anxious question.